They told the female CEO that her Ferrari was beyond saving for the day. 5 certified specialists had tried. 5 had failed. And the only man left standing beside the silent machine was a grease-stained single dad everyone assumed had wandered into the wrong place. The annual Sterling Innovations Leadership Summit had drawn some of the brightest executives, engineers, investors, and automotive innovators in America. Cameras floated through the glass-walled showroom, while soft piano music echoed beneath towering skylights, reflecting across polished marble floors and the flawless crimson paint of a limited production Ferrari that was meant to symbolize precision, perfection, and power. Instead, it had become the day's most embarrassing silence. Victoria Sterling folded her arms as another technician stepped back from the open engine bay and slowly removed his gloves. His expression said everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling. We've exhausted every diagnostic procedure we have." Around them, quiet conversations spread through the crowd like ripples across still water. Some whispered about software. Others blamed an electrical failure. A few questioned whether transporting the vehicle had damaged its systems. Victoria glanced at the expensive watches on the wrists surrounding her. Every passing second chipped away at the flawless image she had spent years building. Across the showroom, Ethan Walker had been finishing a maintenance call on an aging delivery truck belonging to the catering company. His work shirt carried faint oil stains that no amount of washing could completely erase. His toolbox had scratches earned through honest work instead of polished displays. He wasn't supposed to be part of this event. He simply happened to be there when someone muttered, almost as a joke, "Maybe the mechanic can fix what the experts couldn't." A few restrained laughs drifted through the room. Ethan didn't react. He quietly closed his toolbox and continued wiping his hands with an old shop towel. Years of raising his daughter alone had taught him that pride was loud, but dignity rarely needed to raise its voice. Victoria noticed him only because everyone else had turned to look first. She studied the ordinary man standing several yards away. Mid-40s, calm eyes, relaxed shoulders. Nothing about him suggested extraordinary talent. Nothing except the way he never seemed interested in proving himself. She walked toward him with measured confidence. "Can you fix a Ferrari?" she asked, her tone balanced somewhere between skepticism and curiosity. Ethan looked at the silent car instead of her. His gaze rested on it for only a few seconds before returning to Victoria. "I don't know," he answered softly, "but I can listen to it." A puzzled smile appeared on several faces. Someone whispered that engines didn't talk. Another quietly joked that perhaps hope had become more valuable than expertise. Ethan ignored every word. He approached the Ferrari with slow, respectful steps, not like a man eager to impress, but like someone greeting an old friend after many years apart. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, the bustling showroom gradually grew quieter. Conversations faded. Phone screens lowered. Even the photographers hesitated before pressing another shutter. No one realized that the greatest surprise waiting inside that room wasn't hidden beneath the Ferrari's hood. It was hidden inside the quiet man who had spent years making sure the most important engine in his life was never the one beneath a sports car, but the heart of the little girl waiting for him to come home before dinner. Ethan stopped beside the open engine compartment without reaching for a single tool. He simply stood there, letting the silence settle around him as though every sound inside the showroom mattered. The polished floor reflected the afternoon sun, while the faint scent of premium gasoline mixed with expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. Somewhere across the room, a crystal glass touched another with a soft chime before even that faded away. Victoria watched him carefully. She had spent her career reading boardrooms, negotiating billion-dollar contracts, and recognizing confidence the moment it entered a room. Yet there was something different about this man. He did not carry confidence like a performance. He carried it like someone who had nothing left to prove. One of the senior technicians folded his arms. "You cannot diagnose a modern Italian supercar by looking at it." Ethan nodded politely. "You are right." The technician smirked, believing the conversation had ended. Then Ethan quietly added, "That is why I am not looking at it." Several people exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan leaned slightly toward the engine bay without touching a single component. He closed his eyes for only a moment, listening to the faint clicking of cooling metal. His fingers rested gently on the edge of the chassis, feeling vibrations almost too subtle for anyone else to notice. He inhaled slowly, catching the distinct smell of fuel lingering beneath the sharp scent of heated aluminum. Then he stepped back. Victoria frowned. "You have not connected any diagnostic equipment." Ethan smiled gently. "Sometimes machines tell you what they detect. Sometimes they hide what they cannot understand." A young engineer quietly whispered to another, "This is becoming theater." Ethan heard the comment, but ignored it. Instead, he walked once around the Ferrari, his pace unhurried, his eyes following no obvious pattern. He paused beside the rear quarter panel before crouching near the passenger side, studying something no one else seemed interested in. The room remained unusually quiet. Even those expecting him to fail had become curious enough to stop talking. Victoria found herself watching his hands more than the car. They were rough, marked by years of honest labor, yet every movement displayed remarkable patience. They were not the hands of someone trying to impress a crowd. They were the hands of someone who respected precision. Finally, Ethan stood again and looked toward the technicians. "May I ask one question?" The oldest specialist nodded cautiously. "Go ahead." Ethan glanced toward the maintenance records lying on a nearby table. "Has anyone confirmed every replacement part installed over the last 6 months came directly from the original manufacturer?" The technicians looked at each other. One answered almost immediately, "Of course. We only use approved suppliers." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Approved suppliers are not always original manufacturers." The words landed softly, but they settled over the showroom with surprising weight. Victoria felt something shift inside her. It was not belief. Not yet. It was curiosity replacing doubt. She had invited experts from around the world to this event, yet none of them had asked that simple question. Ethan looked back at the motionless Ferrari one more time before quietly saying, "If I am correct, the engine has never been the problem. It has only been following instructions from the wrong part." No one laughed this time. The silence that followed felt heavier than every conversation that had filled the building only minutes before. The oldest technician slowly reached for the maintenance binder and turned its thick pages with growing uncertainty. Every service stamp appeared authentic. Every invoice carried the logo of an approved supplier. Every inspection had been signed without hesitation. "Everything checks out," he finally said, although his voice carried far less confidence than before. Ethan nodded with quiet respect. "The paperwork probably does." He walked toward the workbench where several replacement components from previous maintenance visits had been neatly displayed for presentation during the summit. Among polished carbon fiber pieces and precision machine parts rested a compact electronic control module that looked perfectly ordinary. Ethan picked it up carefully, holding it beneath the overhead lights. He did not accuse anyone. He did not rush to conclusions. He simply studied the tiny manufacturing marks engraved along one edge before offering it to the senior technician. "Would you read the final line?" The technician adjusted his glasses. His forehead tightened. "This serial number does not match the production batch." Another engineer immediately stepped closer. "That cannot be right." They checked the records again. Then another specialist compared the code against the manufacturer's database on his tablet. His expression changed almost instantly. This component was never assigned to this vehicle. Quiet whispers spread across the showroom. Victoria stepped closer, no longer watching from a distance. "What does that mean?" she asked. Ethan rested his hands calmly at his sides. "It means the engine has been obeying instructions that were never written for it." One engineer shook his head, but the software accepted the installation. Ethan gave a small smile. Modern systems trust what appears familiar. Sometimes people do the same thing. No one answered. The sentence lingered in the air far longer than anyone expected. Victoria looked from the control module to Ethan. "Can it be corrected?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Yes, if the original unit is still available." A member of the event staff hurried toward the storage cases assembled for the exhibition and returned several minutes later, carrying a carefully labeled box. Inside rested the factory-installed module removed during routine servicing months earlier. The technicians examined it with renewed urgency. Every identification mark matched perfectly. Every security seal aligned with the manufacturer's records. One of the younger engineers quietly admitted, "We never thought to compare the original part because we assumed the replacement came directly from the approved network." Ethan simply nodded. Assumptions save time until they become expensive. Victoria folded her arms once more, but this time it was not out of authority. It was to steady the mixture of disbelief and admiration quietly growing inside her. She had built an empire by rewarding intelligence, yet she suddenly realized wisdom often arrived wearing work boots instead of tailored suits. Ethan accepted a small wrench from the technician beside him and carefully removed the incorrect module. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost gentle, as though every bolt deserved respect. The showroom remained completely still except for the soft clicking of polished tools against metal. No one reached for a camera. No one whispered another joke. Every eye followed the quiet mechanic whose steady hands revealed a truth that millions of dollars in equipment had failed to notice. As Ethan secured the original component into place, he closed the engine cover without ceremony and looked toward Victoria with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning. "Whenever you are ready," he said softly. "Please start the engine." The car has been waiting for someone to listen to it instead of arguing with it. Victoria drew a slow breath before sliding into the driver's seat. The luxurious cabin suddenly felt much smaller than it had only minutes earlier. Her fingertips rested lightly on the leather-wrapped steering wheel while the entire showroom seemed to hold its breath with her. Beyond the windshield, rows of executives, engineers, reporters, and invited guests stood perfectly still beneath the bright afternoon light pouring through the towering glass walls. She pressed the ignition button once. For the briefest moment, nothing happened. Then a smooth pulse traveled through the chassis, followed by the unmistakable growl of a perfectly balanced engine awakening as though it had never been troubled at all. The rich mechanical note filled the showroom with effortless confidence, not loud enough to demand attention, yet impossible to ignore. Every conversation disappeared. Every expression froze. One heartbeat earlier, the room had been filled with uncertainty. Now it was filled with something even stronger. Respect. Victoria looked down at the instrument cluster. Every warning light had vanished. Every system displayed normal operation. She gently touched the accelerator. The engine responded instantly with crisp precision, each increase in revolutions sounding clean, controlled, and beautifully alive. The senior technician stepped forward, almost unable to believe what he was hearing. He connected the official diagnostic computer one final time. Lines of data streamed across the screen before settling into a flawless report. No faults, no hidden alerts, no abnormal readings. He checked again. The result remained exactly the same. Slowly, he lowered the tablet. "It is perfect," he whispered, almost to himself. No applause came. No celebration erupted. The silence carried far more weight than cheering ever could. Ethan quietly gathered the few tools he had borrowed and returned each one to the workbench exactly where it belonged. He wiped the wrench with a clean cloth before placing it beside the others, treating borrowed equipment with the same respect he showed every person he met. Victoria stepped out of the Ferrari and walked toward him. For several seconds, she searched for the right words, but found none. She had delivered keynote speeches before thousands of people without hesitation, yet speaking to this quiet mechanic suddenly felt unexpectedly difficult. "Thank you," she finally said. Ethan smiled gently. "You are welcome." She hesitated. "You knew exactly where to look." Ethan shrugged almost apologetically. "Not exactly. I only knew where not to waste time." A few soft laughs escaped from the surrounding engineers, but this time they were not laughing at him. They were laughing at themselves. The oldest technician extended his hand. "I owe you an apology. I judged your shirt before I noticed your experience." Ethan accepted the handshake warmly. "We all miss things sometimes. Cars teach us that every day." Those simple words settled deeply into everyone listening. There was no pride in his voice, no desire to embarrass anyone, only quiet grace. Across the showroom, one elderly guest who had remained silent throughout the demonstration slowly stepped away from the crowd. His silver hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and his thoughtful eyes never left Ethan's face. He stared a little longer than seemed ordinary before narrowing his eyes with growing recognition. His breathing slowed. A forgotten memory appeared to be finding its way back. He whispered a single name under his breath, almost as though he could not believe it himself. "Walker." Ethan looked up the instant he heard it. Their eyes met across the polished floor, and for the first time that afternoon, the calm expression on Ethan's face shifted ever so slightly. It was not fear. It was recognition. And in that quiet moment, the story everyone thought had just ended was only beginning. The elderly man crossed the showroom floor with slow, deliberate steps, ignoring the conversations that had quietly returned around him. His tailored navy suit and understated silver tie reflected decades of quiet success rather than a desire for attention. When he finally stopped in front of Ethan, he searched the mechanic's face with the careful certainty of someone opening a long-forgotten chapter of his life. "I knew I recognized those eyes," he said softly. "You are Ethan Walker." The room grew quiet again. Victoria looked from one man to the other, sensing that another unexpected story was about to unfold. Ethan offered a respectful nod. "It has been a long time, Richard." Several engineers exchanged confused glances. None of them recognized the name, but Richard Bennett certainly recognized Ethan. A gentle smile appeared on the older man's face, mixed with admiration that had only deepened over the years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, turning toward the gathering crowd, "you have spent the last 20 minutes wondering how an ordinary mechanic solved a problem that specialists could not. The answer is simple. He is not ordinary." The words spread through the room like a quiet wave. Nobody interrupted him. Richard continued, 15 years ago, I served as an executive consultant on one of the most ambitious performance engineering programs in the automotive industry. The youngest engineer in the room was always the calmest. While everyone else argued over simulations and presentations, he listened. While everyone chased complicated solutions, he found elegant ones. We used to joke that Ethan could hear what an engine was trying to say before the computers could. Victoria stared at Ethan, unable to hide her surprise. "You worked in performance engineering?" Ethan smiled politely without meeting her eyes. "A long time ago." Richard gently shook his head. "Not just performance engineering. He led breakthroughs that influence projects people still admire today. His ideas solved problems that teams twice his size could not solve." One of the younger engineers looked genuinely stunned. "If that is true, why did he disappear?" Richard glanced toward Ethan before answering with quiet respect. "Because sometimes life asks greater things of us than our careers." Ethan remained silent. He did not correct the story, nor did he expand upon it. Victoria noticed that silence. It was the silence of someone protecting memories instead of hiding achievements. Richard spoke again, his voice softer now. "I visited him once after his wife passed away. He had every opportunity to return to the industry. Companies offered remarkable positions. Instead, he chose to raise his little girl himself. He told me that engines could wait, but childhood could not. No one moved. No one reached for a phone." The words settled deeply inside every listener. Victoria slowly looked at Ethan's weathered hands again. They no longer appeared ordinary. They carried years of sacrifice. Early mornings, late nights, school lunches, homework, broken bicycles, and honest work that never appeared on a resume. Richard smiled warmly. "The greatest engineer I ever met decided the most important machine he would ever care for was not built in Italy or Germany. It was the future of his daughter." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before quietly answering. "She needed her father more than the world needed another engineer." Victoria felt something shift inside her heart. Success had always meant building larger companies, achieving greater innovation, and reaching higher goals. Yet standing before her was a man who had quietly walked away from extraordinary recognition without bitterness or regret. And for the first time in many years, she began to wonder whether the greatest measure of brilliance had never been talent at all, but the quiet courage to choose what truly mattered. Richard's words remained suspended in the air long after he finished speaking. No one rushed to fill the silence. Even the photographers lowered their cameras, sensing that the most important moment could never be captured through a lens alone. Victoria looked at Ethan differently now. The stained work shirt, the worn boots, the weathered hands, none of them suggested failure anymore. They spoke of choices. They spoke of sacrifice. They spoke of a man who had quietly traded recognition for responsibility without asking the world for applause. Ethan reached for his old toolbox and closed the metal latches with a familiar click. The sound was simple, almost ordinary, yet it carried the quiet rhythm of someone preparing to return to everyday life. "I should get going," he said gently. "My daughter gets out of school in less than an hour." Victoria blinked, surprised by the simplicity of his words. "That is it?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "That is enough." She stepped closer. "You just solved a problem that some of the best engineers in the industry could not solve. Surely you realize what happened here today." Ethan looked around the showroom where expensive suits stood beside polished automobiles, where success was measured in innovation, market value, and influence. Then he answered with the same quiet honesty that had guided every word he had spoken that afternoon. A car is running again. That is all that happened. Richard chuckled softly. You always did underestimate yourself. Ethan shook his head. No, I simply learned that every problem looks larger when it becomes part of your pride. Those standing nearby exchanged thoughtful glances. The sentence carried more wisdom than anyone expected from such a calm voice. Victoria found herself remembering countless meetings where people defended their own ideas instead of searching for better ones. She had built companies by demanding excellence, yet she suddenly wondered how many brilliant voices had remained unheard because they had not looked impressive enough. Mr. Walker, she said carefully, would you allow me to visit your garage sometime? Ethan seemed genuinely surprised. It is not much to look at. Perhaps, Victoria replied, but I think I have spent enough time looking at impressive buildings. I would rather understand the person inside the ordinary one. Ethan hesitated for a moment before giving a polite nod. You are welcome anytime. A member of Victoria's executive team quietly approached her with a tablet. Your next presentation begins in 15 minutes. She glanced at the schedule before handing the tablet back. Delay it by 30 minutes. The assistant looked stunned. The investors are already seated. Victoria smiled faintly. They can wait. She turned back toward Ethan just as he lifted his toolbox from the floor. It looked heavier than it had earlier, not because its weight had changed, but because everyone now understood what those hands had carried through the years. As Ethan walked toward the exit, several engineers instinctively stepped aside to clear a path. Nobody had asked them to do it. Respect had simply replaced assumption. He acknowledged each person with a small nod before pushing open the glass door. Warm afternoon sunlight spilled across the entrance, wrapping the parking lot in golden light. Just before Ethan reached his aging pickup truck, a young valet hurried toward him carrying a small pink backpack that had been resting behind the service counter all afternoon. Ethan accepted it with a grateful smile. Tucked into the front pocket was a handwritten note decorated with tiny blue stars. He opened it, read only the first line, and his tired eyes softened immediately. It simply said, "Good luck today, Dad. I already know you can fix anything that listens to your heart. Love, Emma." For the first time that day, Victoria realized the greatest masterpiece Ethan had ever built had never been an engine. It was the quiet life waiting for him at home. The drive home took Ethan just under 20 minutes, following familiar roads lined with maple trees and neighborhood ball fields where children laughed beneath the warm afternoon sun. His aging pickup truck hummed steadily, carrying none of the prestige of the exotic automobiles he had quietly outperformed only an hour earlier. To Ethan, it did not matter. It always started. It always brought him home. That was enough. He pulled into the gravel driveway of a modest white house with a small front porch decorated by flower pots that Emma insisted on watering every weekend. The paint showed its age in a few places, and the wooden fence leaned ever so slightly, but every inch of the property reflected care instead of wealth. Before Ethan could climb out of the truck, the front door burst open. Emma ran across the yard with a backpack bouncing against her shoulders and a smile bright enough to erase every exhausting moment from his day. "Dad," she called. Ethan laughed as she wrapped her arms around him. "How was school?" "I got 100% on my science quiz," she said proudly. "I knew you would," Ethan replied. "Did you remember to eat the apple?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "And I traded my cookies because my friend forgot her lunch." Ethan smiled with quiet pride. "That sounds like your mother." They walked inside together, where the comforting smell of homemade chicken soup filled the small kitchen. Family photographs rested on the shelves. Some showed Emma riding her first bicycle. Others captured camping trips, birthdays, and school concerts. One framed picture near the window held the smiling face of Ethan's late wife, Sarah. Fresh wildflowers stood beside it, replaced every Sunday without fail. Ethan glanced toward the photograph for only a moment before setting his toolbox near the back door. Emma noticed the familiar expression on his face. She gently slipped her small hand into his. "Was today hard?" she asked. Ethan knelt beside her until they were eye level. "Today reminded me that people sometimes see clothes before they see character." Emma thought quietly before answering. "But good people always look twice." Ethan smiled. Who taught you that? Emma grinned. You did. While they prepared dinner together, Ethan chopped vegetables as Emma carefully stirred the soup exactly the way her mother had taught her years before. Their conversation wandered from spelling tests to a class project about famous inventors. Emma suddenly looked up with curious eyes. Dad, if you used to invent things, why do you fix cars now? Ethan paused for only a heartbeat before answering honestly. Because inventions change machines. Being your father changed me. Emma accepted the answer without another question. Children often understood truths that adults complicated. Across town, however, Victoria sat alone inside her office overlooking the city skyline. The presentation she had postponed had ended successfully, yet she remembered almost none of it. Instead, her thoughts kept returning to the quiet mechanic who had walked away from recognition as easily as someone leaving a grocery store after buying bread. She opened her laptop and typed a single name into the company's archived engineering database. Hundreds of confidential records appeared. Patents, design, reviews, internal awards, technical breakthroughs. Ethan Walker's name surfaced again and again, attached to innovations that had quietly shaped an entire generation of performance engineering. Victoria leaned back slowly, unable to reconcile the celebrated engineer on the screen with the humble father who had rushed home because his daughter would be waiting. She closed the laptop without opening another file. For the first time in many years, quarterly reports, investor meetings, and market forecasts seemed strangely small. Somewhere beyond the city lights, a quiet man was helping his daughter finish homework at a worn wooden kitchen table, and somehow that ordinary evening felt more extraordinary than everything she had accomplished that day. 3 days passed before Victoria finally kept the quiet promise she had made to herself. Instead of arriving with a convoy of luxury vehicles or a team of assistants, she drove alone in a modest sedan that blended into the afternoon traffic. She parked beside Ethan's small garage just after 9 o'clock on a clear Saturday morning. The building was simple, with faded blue paint, an old wooden sign that read Walker Auto Service, and flower boxes beneath the windows filled with bright yellow daisies. The steady rhythm of tools echoed softly from inside, while the smell of fresh coffee, mixed with clean motor oil, drifted through the open garage door. Ethan looked up from an old pickup truck resting on the lift and smiled with quiet surprise. "Good morning," he said. "You found the place." Victoria returned the smile. "It was easier than I expected." Ethan wiped his hands on a clean shop towel. "I am afraid I cannot offer a boardroom." She glanced around the garage. Every tool rested in its proper place. Every shelf was neatly organized. Every customer waiting area chair had been repaired instead of replaced. "I think I have spent enough time in boardrooms," she replied. "This feels more honest." Before Ethan could answer, the sound of a bicycle bell rang outside. Emma rode into the parking lot wearing a bright blue helmet, balancing carefully before stopping beside the garage. She climbed off the bicycle with a cheerful grin. "Dad, I beat my best time from the park." Ethan smiled proudly. "I knew you could." Emma noticed Victoria standing nearby and offered a friendly wave without hesitation. "Hello." Victoria waved back. "Hello, Emma." The little girl tilted her head curiously. "You know my name?" Victoria nodded gently. "Your father talks about you with a great deal of pride." Emma smiled before looking at Ethan. "Can I help inside?" "Only if you remember the safety rules," Ethan answered. "Always," Emma said confidently. She carefully parked her bicycle, washed her hands at the utility sink, and immediately began organizing clean shop rags into neat stacks without being asked. Victoria watched the routine unfold with quiet admiration. There was no rush, no raised voices, no unnecessary instructions. Father and daughter moved through the garage with the effortless teamwork that only years of shared routines could create. While Ethan finished replacing a water pump on the customer's truck, Emma sat at a small workbench, finishing her math homework. Every few minutes, she proudly announced another correct answer, and Ethan answered each one with the same encouragement he offered every customer who trusted him with a vehicle. Victoria accepted a cup of freshly brewed coffee from the small break area and found herself smiling more than she had in weeks. The expensive offices she managed every day suddenly felt distant compared to this quiet garage where patience mattered more than status. After the customer drove away with a grateful smile and a fair repair bill, Victoria finally asked the question that had followed her since the summit. Do you ever miss the life you left behind? Ethan looked through the open garage door where Emma was helping an elderly neighbor carry 2 grocery bags from her car to the sidewalk. His answer came without hesitation. I miss some of the people. I miss solving difficult problems. But I have never regretted choosing the life that allowed me to watch my daughter grow one ordinary day at a time. Victoria followed his gaze toward Emma, whose kindness seemed as natural as breathing. In that quiet moment, she realized something no business school had ever taught her. Success could build remarkable companies, but character built remarkable families. And standing inside that modest garage, she quietly understood which achievement would outlast them all. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees outside Walker Auto Service with shades of amber and gold. Customers still came because Ethan was honest, not because of the remarkable story that had spread through the automotive world. He never placed newspaper clippings on the walls. He never mentioned the luxury car he had repaired. Every morning he unlocked the garage before sunrise, brewed fresh coffee, and greeted each customer with the same calm respect, whether they drove a 20-year-old sedan or a brand-new luxury vehicle. Emma continued riding her bicycle to the garage after school, finishing homework at the small wooden table while her father worked only a few feet away. It was an ordinary life, and Ethan considered that its greatest blessing. One crisp Friday afternoon, a familiar sedan rolled into the parking lot. Victoria stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee instead of a leather briefcase. She smiled as Emma hurried over to greet her. I saved you a seat, Emma said proudly, pointing toward the old bench outside the garage. Victoria laughed softly. Then I would better not keep my host waiting. The 3 of them sat together beneath the gentle afternoon sun while fallen leaves drifted across the pavement. For several quiet minutes no one spoke. The silence felt comfortable, the kind shared only by people who no longer needed to impress one another. Finally, Victoria reached into her bag and placed a neatly sealed envelope on the bench beside Ethan. I promised myself I would ask one last time, she said. Ethan looked at the envelope but made no move to open it. What is it? A partnership, Victoria answered. Not a job, not a promotion. A partnership built around your conditions instead of mine. Ethan slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a proposal creating a small engineering research division located less than 10 miles from his home, with flexible hours, a modest team, and one sentence highlighted across the first page. Family always comes first. Ethan looked up in surprise. Victoria smiled gently. You taught me that extraordinary work should never require someone to abandon the people who matter most. Emma leaned closer, trying to understand the grown-up conversation. Does this mean my dad still gets to eat dinner with me? Victoria looked at her with warm eyes. Every single evening. Ethan remained silent for a long moment. He was not thinking about titles, patents, or recognition. He was thinking about school concerts, science fairs, weekend breakfasts, and bedtime conversations. At last he extended his hand. Then I would be honored to help. Victoria shook his hand with genuine gratitude, not because she had gained a brilliant engineer, but because she had earned the trust of a remarkable man. Months later, the small research center quietly produced innovations that attracted attention across the industry. Journalists often asked Ethan how he had returned to engineering after so many years away. He always answered with the same gentle smile. I never really left. I was simply building something more important first. Those who heard the story usually expected its greatest miracle to be the repaired machine or the rediscovered genius. They were mistaken. The true miracle was that a father never allowed success to replace love. A daughter grew up knowing she had always been her father's greatest achievement, and a woman who once measured life by accomplishment discovered that quiet dignity, steady kindness, and second chances could transform not only careers, but hearts. In the end, the most powerful engine was never the one that purred beneath polished metal. It was the quiet strength of a humble man who chose character over applause, family over fame, and grace over pride, leaving behind a legacy that would continue long after every machine had fallen silent.